All right, I get to start us off today. Um, Fresh off maternity leave, I'm gonna not butcher this today. Um, so this topic is our discipline policies and procedures. Like Emily mentioned, we do record all of them, and you can find them in the media library on the NeMTSS website that has all the recordings from all the Coffee Connects from the last 2 years, and then also other recordings from regional leads or early childhood facilitators or PBIS coaches. So if you're looking for resources, that's a good resource. Then this is our team. We have 5 SEBL specialists now as of August 1st. I'm Mackenzie. I'm in Region 1. I'll let the others introduce themselves.
Emily Arkfeld, Social Emotional Behavioral Learning Specialist, now just serving Region 2, ESUs 2, 3, and OPS.
I'm Jill Gunther, one of the other SEBL specialists, and I serve Region 3, which is ESUs 1, 7, and 8. And then we also have 2 other SEBL specialists, so our 2 new ones, Chandra and Sarah. They were unable to join us this morning. They're actually getting ready to go to a PBIS conference, which is where we are also heading later today. So,
in the spirit of Halloween, we have a nice little welcoming inclusion activity. You can just put it in the chat, or you can just share out, since we're a small group, which jack-o'-lantern are you feeling today?
If I had to guess, I'm going to put Jill at an 8 today.
I was actually trying to decide, like, I feel like I'm kind of a combo of a lot of these. But yes, feeling 8 today.
I'm gonna go with 6.
That's kind of how I feel too.
I think I'm gonna go with 7. Like I'm starting to wilt, but I'm still hanging on like as long as I can.
Mary, you're looking good today.
I'm a 2. I'm feeling pretty good. After running all over for the last week and a half. So later today, I'm going to be a little bit more 8-ish, I think, though, you know.
All right.
Okay, I put the link to the slides in the chat, so you should have access to those. This is our Padlet. It is the same every time. We just change out the resources, and then we add in the previous Coffee Connect that gets its own Padlet. And so you can go there to get any resources we share within the slides. There's usually a couple more that we don't share. And then we're starting off things with a quote. And so today we picked, the reality is that well-behaved students aren't behaving themselves because of the school discipline program. They're behaving themselves because they have the skills to handle life changes in an adaptive fashion. And so really hitting home the idea that those social skills and the behaviors really go hand in hand. And we need to foster them together and not build them out separately in our schools. So social emotional behavior learning, this is Nebraska NeMTSS's definition, the systematic process of fostering social and emotional skills for students and adults in order to create supportive environments and safe environments with positive behavioral and mental health outcomes for all. And so thinking about not only building this for our students, but how are we building it and supporting our adults in the process and doing it systematically so it's more sustainable and it can meet the needs of multiple people that might have varying needs. And then tying in those mental health outcomes, because we believe that mental health, behavior, and social emotional skills and mindfulness and wellness and all those things, they all really are interconnected. So another visual to go along with that, we have those social emotional skills And then we might have PBIS expectations. We might have career readiness standards, but really, if we want our students to meet those expectations, they're going to have to build on those social emotional skills like self-awareness, self-management, relationships. If they want to be respectful, they might need social awareness. But really, if we have those expectations, it also leads as a way to help foster and grow upon those social emotional competencies. This is our web that we made. So you might see the competencies and feel like, well, I think I know what self-awareness is, but what is it really? It's kind of an abstract concept. And so we broke these out a little bit further, so it targets some more specific skills. And then we actually have it broken out even further if you're interested. So example, self-awareness has interest, and then we actually break that out for more specific skills around interest. And so I think it just makes it a little bit more concrete for educators to see some of those skills that they're probably already targeting in some capacity in their everyday, day in, day out. And I didn't do it, but the other SEBL specialists worked on revamping this. It's not done yet, but I will say those skills that they added and those sub skills, it's great. I really liked it when I looked through it last week. And so that'll be out soon, and hopefully we'll share it next month. So when thinking about discipline policies or responding to behaviors, it's important to think that the choices that schools make in how they're responding to behaviors or how they're disciplining their students really impacts the climate and the perception of the school and the building, and I guess the adults in the building too. And then students and adults' perceptions of the use of and need to develop that social, emotional, and behavioral skills. And Emily has a slide a little bit later, but as we're teaching these skills, if we're quick to send students to the office, it contradicts itself. And so we'll talk a little bit about the importance of the way we're responding. So building a systematic process around social emotional behavioral learning, or PBIS, it's not about ignoring behaviors, avoiding consequences, or giving rewards and prizes for only good behaviors. It really thinks about teaching and supporting those social emotional behavioral growth, setting clear expectations for students and staff, and having appropriate consequences when those expectations aren't met, creating environments that are based on relationships, and creating a sense of belonging, which makes positive and safe environments, positive and safe culture too. And then being able to respond to behaviors in effective and sustainable ways. Because sometimes we are responding to behaviors, but then they just happen again, and they happen again, and they happen again. So it's not effective, and it really starts to wear down on staff and administrators that are doing it over and over and over again. And if you don't follow the legislature, which I don't follow it great, but I did hear about this one, schools cannot suspend preschool to second grade students anymore unless they bring a deadly weapon onto school property. And so they have to find an alternative to suspension. And so this is kind of a timely topic as we talk about these policies and procedures. Okay, so we use some fidelity tools in our work. These are just ways of going through and kind of gauging progress when it comes to systematically building up these systems and seeing how we're supporting various areas. And so you have the TFI, or the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, and then we also made a social emotional behavioral learning rubric. And on both of them, they have discipline policies or policies and practices. And if you read through them, the components that are really important are having proactive practices, instructive practices, and restorative practices. and then being able to implement them consistently and documenting them consistently. So what are those? We're going to dive into them a little bit deeper, but proactive is really that positive, preventative practices that we're doing. It might be around your classroom management, using active supervision, having a room environment that's set up in a way that might result in more positive outcomes, having some regulation strategies, giving student choice. Instructive is really those teachable moments. How are we teaching and giving some of that in the moment? And then restorative is the after the fact, building up those relationships if things don't always go perfect. And discipline policies answer the following questions. Why is the policy necessary? How are we using those proactive, instructive, and restorative approaches to support the policy? Which practices do we need that are necessary to implement it effectively? And then I just kind of skipped that. And what procedures specifically do we need to implement it? So Emily's going to dive a little deeper into proactive.
Thanks, Mackenzie. All right, so giving a couple just additional resources around that proactive piece. We want to be preventative. We want to keep our students in the classroom as much as possible, and so really beefing up this section to help catch our students before the behavior gets, to a level that we are looking to for an office referral or moving them outside of the classroom and that instruction time. So this is a nice graphic that we found just to some things we can remind ourselves, tell ourselves, affirmations we can use for ourselves. We can have the best system in place. We can have the best expectations, all of those things in place. We're still going to have students who have behaviors. That is just the reality of things. And so reminding ourselves that this is someone's child. They are a good person at heart. They want to be successful. We can help set them up for success. We can choose to welcome them back into space and to forgive things that happened in the past. Kids, I think one of my favorite lines is like, kids do well if they can. Kids don't want really to have big behaviors, to disappoint, their educators, to disappoint their loved ones at home, all of those things. And so our kids get dysregulated. And so we have the opportunity to provide that space for them to make mistakes and to be welcomed back and to learn from that. And so helping keep ourselves in a good place to be able to respond appropriately and effectively, not escalate the situation, and then always let kids know, you're safe here, you belong here, we want you here, you made a mistake, that's fine, let's learn from it and move on. What great learning opportunities for our kids to practice that. And so we as adults have to be super regulated and aware of ourselves to be able to provide that space for our students. One way to really set up that environment for success is using these powerful practices. It's linked in here in the slide, it's in the Padlet, and then we did a whole Coffee Connect on powerful practices. And if you were at the summit, I think Heather and Scott did one on powerful practices. So lots of information out there, lots of resources out there around that. But really when we, build these with those relationships at the core, we have to know our kids. We have to know who they are, what their needs are. We have to provide that in an environment and in a safe environment for them. But when we're putting these into place, it helps us teach and reinforce those new SEBL skills that we might be helping them, model and teach and all of those things. And it helps us build that trusting relationship between staff and students and families. So again, providing that environment for kids to learn and to make mistakes and to practice these skills. And then it also helps just prompt us to consider possible reasons for behavior. Like I said, kids do well when they can. So trying to figure out what might be causing this behavior, what's a function of this behavior, and how do we help put some things in place to be preventative and proactive in that. recognition. So the most effective strategy for promoting motivation, cooperation, and on-task behavior is recognition. And so this is a couple ways to do that. It's just so we can do that nonverbal approval, which is thumbs up or smiling at them, or showing in our nonverbals that like, hey, I see what you're doing and I like what you're doing, and keep doing some of that. We can do written stuff. So we can slide them notes. We can write comments on their paper. My daughter's in first grade and they use Seesaw, and I get notes from her teacher just about things she's seen. And when I ask my daughter about it, she's like, oh yeah, she said that to me too. So I get that written commentary and I can refer back to it at home with her as well. And then verbal approval. So acknowledgement either directly and privately to a student or publicly. So here, like Tabitha has her materials ready, helps prompt those other students around to be like, oh shoot, that's right, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And praising our kids. And this goes back to like making sure you know your kids, because there are some kids who like that public approval and that will help fill their cup. And there are some kids that are like, absolutely do not say anything nice about me where other people could hear that. So getting to know your kids and then using that in the correct way. So there's an example on here. So Carlos, you were very respectful to the speaker when you raised your hand and asked good questions. At the end of the presentation, speakers will want to continue to visit our school when they have respectful audiences. Thank you. And this obviously is an example because you want it to sound like when you give verbal praise, make it sound like yourself. Kiddos they read through us when we are not being authentic. And so find what language works for you. What sounds good to you, what rolls easily off of your tongue, and use that with your kiddos. They will pick up on the authenticity of that. And then when we're thinking about like our positive descriptive feedback, so that should be like when we're working on new skills, we want to hit that frequently. We want that out there a lot. And reinforce if you have like behavioral expectations, or if you've got a matrix, all of those things. So really focus on the language that is written into those and use that when you are reinforcing. And then immediately following the desired behavior, when you see things you want, when it's what we're working on, make sure we're doing it immediately to make that connection for them. And then you can also deliver any reinforcements you might have intermittently and unexpectedly. Mary's our wonderful PBIS coach for Region 3. Mary, do you have anything to add for this slide? Oh, you muted yourself, Mary.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I would just say, I think, like you said, Emily, when you're in those teachable moments and you know your students well, there are a lot of kids that respond better to something small, like a secret sign or of approval, but there are many others, and you can so change the tone of the classroom if you do that, intermittent, unexpected, praising appropriate behavior. And you just see lots of teachers who are very good at that, and it's reflected in their classroom how they can shape that behavior so much more efficiently.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Great. Here's just a resource. So this is from NCPMI, which is the Pyramid Model Institute. And so there are fantastic resources on here. These are early childhood. It is an early childhood like website, but so many of the resources can be used with older kids as well. There's lots of great things on here. So this is easy, quick. You could print this out, have this on your desk or on your clipboard or something as some of those reminders if you are working on building up your language around these. So some of those verbal encouragement things. And I like these because these also help like have that growth mindset lens of like, oh, you're really like, we're getting away from like just great job or you're really good at this, but focusing on that, like you're working so hard on, you must feel proud of yourself. So giving them some of that like intrinsic motivation and feeling proud of themselves for things. Great job remembering to, you almost have it. You did it, you're doing it, you're almost there, all of those things. And then the nonverbal reminders as well. So giving a hug, obviously, in a way that is appropriate and a manner that's appropriate, and that your students, that's something that would work for them. Thumbs up or a wink, clapping, special handshake, like Mary said. So maybe it's something, a special little thing between you guys that just a nonverbal cue or something that they recognize. Little happy dance. So just quick reminders of, like, as you're trying to build that up, if that's something you're focusing on, and that positive reinforcement, having this accessible. So some resources there for you. So moving on to instructive again, and as a reminder, this is the instruction that you're doing in your classrooms, and school-wide, any procedures and routines that you have in place, using pre-corrections, acknowledgement, and then corrections when needed. Sorry. So this, Mackenzie was referring to this earlier. So this is from Dr. Gloria Martinez Perez, and it's Heart-Centered Discipline. What is the name of the book, Mackenzie? Sorry.
She calls it Teaching with the Heart in Mind, and her heart is an acronym for social emotional skills.
Okay, I was way off. Teaching with the Heart in Mind, and her, yeah, so her HEART's acronym is what we have as our SEBL competencies. But this piece, just that, like, if we're saying that we value social emotional learning, behavioral learning in our schools, and we're teaching it and we're focusing on it and we're really building it into what we do and making it just like, this is how we work in here, then we need to make sure that we're giving the students the opportunity to practice those skills when they do make mistakes. And so we can't just see a behavior, an unexpected behavior or an unwanted behavior, and immediately put a consequence in place, whether that is, you know, a different seat in the classroom or out of the classroom or going to the office or a referral or things like that, but really giving kids an opportunity to practice those skills. Because if we don't, then we're sending those mixed signals of saying, like, hey, we think this is really important and we're going to practice this and we're going to spend time on it. Oh, but we're not actually going to let you use it in the moments where you need to use it. And so then if we're doing lessons and we're trying to engage students in modeling and fostering their SEBL skills, they're going to be disengaged and they're not going to want to participate because they're like, why should I spend time doing this if you won't even like allow me to use these skills when I need them? And then if they're not applying them in those safe and supportive environments within our schools, they're less likely then to also use those out into other situations and across different environments where they might not know that they're safe there or supported. And so will have more behaviors because they don't feel safe enough or vulnerable enough to use the skills that we're trying to get them to use. So just remembering that if this is something we're saying we're doing, we need to let our kiddos have an opportunity to do that. And again, to make mistakes. And I know research and data has continued to show us lately that behaviors, like we are seeing more behaviors. And I know that that is hard for our teachers in the classroom because you still do have to teach and respond to the rest of your class. And so trying to really push those proactive, preventative pieces and teach these skills so that kids do have more of an opportunity to practice them. And if they practice them when they are regulated, they're more likely to be able to pull on them when they do get dysregulated. And so when thinking about creating your discipline policies and practices, if we find ourselves more in this punishment-based discipline practices, how can we kind of move that needle over to responsive discipline practices? So we want to be inclusionary and supportive and restorative and transformational. Always coming back to those relationships, really focusing on building those relationships in that safe and supportive environment for our kids to feel safe making mistakes. We are doing it with our students and not done to, and we'll get into that in a little bit when we get to the restorative section. Again, proactive and responsive instead of reactive. And so we're responding to our kids instead of reacting when we see unwanted behaviors. And always leaving that child's dignity intact. Like shame is a hard thing for kids and adults to overcome. And so if we can get away from shaming our kiddos as much as possible and letting them hold on to some of that control and that dignity is better long-term for our kids. We want to try to get away from activating that stress, that fight fight, flight, freeze, and really get into that relaxation. So again, teaching them the skills that they can pull on to use when they're feeling dysregulated. We want growth oriented, student oriented. So often kids are doing behaviors that trigger our own dysregulation. And so we want them to stop behaviors that maybe bother us, but really maybe this is like, I think about this with like stimming and things, that helps a child regulate. But sometimes it bothers others. But if it's not bothering them to the point of interrupting like their learning and their other students and adult safety in the classroom and things, then maybe we need to let the kiddos do that in a safe way so that they are getting their needs met. And so really focusing on like, what does the student need in this, and not just like, what do I need as the adult to make myself feel better about the situation? And then looking at adaptive strategies. So technical strategies are really those just like hardline fact ones. And so maybe looking outside the box of some of those adaptive things that might be able to put into place for our kiddos. Anyone have anything to add on that? Mary, I saw you on mute and I didn't know if you wanted to say something or if it was just a button. Okay.
That was just the button.
Okay. It happened to me. I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam.
Okay. And so thinking of, those pre-corrections. So if we're doing pre-corrections, we're helping to encourage that appropriate behavior before we even get to a point where a behavior might occur. And so in the orange, we see an example of what that might sound like. So before we break into group work, if you need help, remember you can ask a peer quietly. And if they don't know the answer, you can go on to the next problem and you can ask me at the break. So whatever your procedures, your routines are in the classroom, those are being pre-taught so that you can then pre-correct to them and remind kiddos of these are the steps, or this is what this looks like in our classroom, to help just trigger that memory of like, oh yeah, this is how I do this. And then I can get my teacher in this way if I need them later, as opposed to calling out or getting up or doing something that is disruptive. And then we have our error corrections following that inappropriate behavior. And those are brief statements regarding that expected behavior. And so we are restating our expectation. We are keeping it brief and short. We are walking away and giving them time to process and then to implement that expected behavior. And if we see it, then we acknowledge, again, using that positive feedback, or we implement a consequence, or we implement the next step in our process of addressing the behavior if we need it. And we always want to just consider our body language and tone of voice. Because again, like kids can read through that. So if you are saying something that maybe sounds right, but it is coming across sarcastic or impatient or condescending, our kids are going to pick up on that. And so this is just another slide to reinforce that as well, that it's not how you say, it's how you say it. And all of these things here, you can say, excuse me, very politely, or you can say, excuse me, very condescendingly. Keep it up can be a super great, keep it up with 2 thumbs up is, super positive words of encouragement. Or it can be like, well, keep it up, which is, saying like, I don't like what I'm seeing. Let's see where this goes. So making sure, again, we are taking our own breath and getting ourselves in a space to respond appropriately, and that our words match our tone of voice when we are saying them. And then moving into this last piece, this restorative. So this is using affective statements, our restorative questions and conversations, community building skills. And again, this is how we are resolving an issue after it has occurred, so that we can, again, forgive any mistakes a kid has made, invite them back into a space where they feel that they belong and are welcomed, even after if they've had a big behavior and it has not gone well. Letting them know like, hey, I want you here, and you are part of this classroom and you belong here. And so let's figure this out so that we can get back to a good place. So restorative practices really help enable our educators and leaders to understand how they might escalate problem behaviors. And it helps students and staff cultivate those strategies for resolving conflict and creating those healthier, more positive interactions. They are processes that proactively build healthy relationships and a sense of community to prevent, because again, prevention, we want to live in there if we can, but address conflict and wrongdoing if possible. And so this is showing that, again, that like really we want to develop that community. So our classroom community, our school community, where safe and supportive environments where our students feel that they belong, so that they can manage any conflict that comes up and restore that relationship because they feel like, yes, I belong here. And yes, this is worth resolving this conflict because I want to, like, this is my space and I want to feel like I belong here. And so we're really focusing 80% of our time on that, building that community and that relationship, so that if we need to get to that 20% of repairing relationships, we have built the foundation for that to happen. And so that's a much smoother process. So this is a continuum of restorative practices. Again, this is a live link. The little blue arrow up in the corner lets us know that. And so again, showing we really focus a lot of that time on that preventative piece of things. So what is our identity of our kids coming in? Who are they? What are they coming with? And how do we then build our own classroom kind of identity too, of like, this is what our classroom looks like, feels like, sounds like, all of that stuff. We have our practices within our classroom to make that safe and supportive. Those are taught and reinforced and pre-corrected too. We use community building through circle time or morning meetings or anything else to help build that relationship. Maybe we're doing a curriculum, a social emotional learning curriculum or something along those lines. And then we can get to the responsive and restorative pieces if we need to, once we've built that foundation. The school discipline window. So the pictures on the right help depict the words on the left. But really thinking so that not that neglectful, I don't even remember what movie that is from, but that's a teacher who just doesn't care, isn't there, lets kids kind of just do, and there isn't much happening. So that's that low support, low control. And then we have high control, low support is that too. That's authoritarian, confronting, like the teacher's like in it to win the conversation every time. And these are what we're doing to kids. If we have low control but high support, then maybe we're doing things for our kids. And so we're trying to fix all of the issues for them instead of letting them learn and use their skills. And ideally, we want to get to that with that restorative piece where our kiddos are using their skills and practicing their skills, and we are helping support them with that in problem solving. It is respectful between both our students and our educators. It is responsive to the needs. And so that's just a nice depiction of like where we really want to get up into that top right quadrant of the doing with our students. And then here's, so affective language. This particular one comes from Allie Hearn, her restorative practices coaching, her training. And so gives kind of that breakdown of things. And so for addressing behaviors that are in alignment, and here she uses alignment with like our, like, what are our values in our classroom, in our school? What do we feel is important? And so like maybe that's like, so this statement is about like getting to class on time. So we use Jose, which, so talking, like using their name, our feelings, words, or affirmation. So I was really proud of you. The observed behavior is getting to class on time, and then why it matters and connecting it back to our expectations or our values. So I know that being here and getting ready can be a challenge for you on some days, and you nailed it. So Jose, I was really proud of you for getting class on time today. I know that being here and being ready can be a challenge for you some days, and you really nailed it. So really, again, connecting it to our expectations, using that specific language to the student and calling out an affirmation along with the behavior. And then if we have to address behaviors that are out of alignment, oops, that sounds just a little bit same kind of process, but then we are adding like that, again, we are like asking them for that specific expectation at the end. So for example, Allie, safety is so important in our classroom. And when you didn't push your chair in, your classmate almost tripped over it and could have gotten really hurt. Can you go push your chair in so that it doesn't happen again? So again, specific to the student, a feeling or an affirmation, the value, an agreement in our classroom. In our classroom, we have agreed to be safe. Being safe looks like pushing your chair in. When you don't push your chair in, someone could fall and get hurt. Can you please go do that? So some examples there for you. And then these go back to the restorative practices questions. So responding to behaviors or a conflict using some of this language. What happened? What were you thinking at the time? What are you thinking now? Who was harmed? How were they effective? And how can we resolve or repair it? So helps just prompt some of those restorative conversations. This is another way of thinking about it. So this connects it. If you really are behavior focused still, this helps kind of, again, move that needle from behavior and restorative pieces of things and helps make that connection. It's from the Caltech, a coaching training that they did. But just another way to look at like those questions we saw on the previous page, connected to maybe some of the language, the behavior language that we've been using in our classrooms and in our schools for a long time. So a situation that happened, putting the behavior in context. How did it make you feel and how did it make others feel? So again, those competency skills of self-awareness and social awareness. So it's a nice kind of just help make that connection in our brains between restorative practices and some of our social or SEBL language that we use also. Okay. Thank you all.
Perfect. Thanks, Emily. Okay, so thinking about those approaches that Emily was just talking about, now we're really going to just take some time to really talk about making sure everyone's on the same page, really how we're responding to those behaviors consistently and really implementing those plans consistently as well. And so just kind of a nice little visual here, you guys can take a look at that. But just as you can see, really thinking about like that coherent system. We want to have that system in place so that everyone is on that same page in order to know how to respond to those unwanted behaviors. We really have to work to be effective, to really be implementing those strategies consistently as well. And so as you can see here, it mentions to be effective, the intervention strategy really needs to fit the misbehavior as well. And so we really want to ensure that we have those pieces in place and that all of our faculty, all of our staff really are in agreement for those categories and then for those processes. And when we're thinking about, we have to have them all on the same page. How do we do that? We really can't forget about that professional development piece. We really have to ensure that we are providing our staff, all of our educators within the building, the tools, the knowledge that they need in order to implement consistently. So when we're thinking about like some of those different behaviors that you see at the top here, so tardiness, physical altercation, profanity, sleeping in class, things like that, we really need to ensure that staff have that understanding of, is that a minor behavior? Is that a major behavior? Is that something that's managed within the classroom? Is that something that's managed within the office or administrator managed? What does that look like? But then when we are saying that it's one of those behaviors that we want to be classroom managed, we also need to ensure that we're really providing the tools for our staff in order to be able to do that. So in order to be able to manage those behaviors within the classroom, and also thinking about all of those approaches that Emily was just talking about, and really having those tools in order to be proactive, in order to be preventative. So hopefully we don't see as many of those behaviors either. A couple different ways, just kind of thinking about like, how can we have some of those conversations with staff about what office managed versus classroom managed looks like. You guys could certainly do, we've seen schools do like a sticker activity or like a Post-it note activity where talking about some of the different behaviors that they've seen within their school, and then each educator, each professional identifies whether they feel that's minor, major, classroom managed, admin managed, and then having discussions where we see kind of those discrepancies and kind of working through and talking through that. Could be an activity that way, could be, we've seen schools do like Google Forms as well, where their responses are via a Google form, and then there's discussions following some of those discrepancies. So just a couple ways to kind of think about that. And we have some examples of some resources from a variety of schools as well. So this is one here from an elementary, just kind of taking a look at that student behavior management process. And we just really liked too how they really call out some of those approaches as well. So taking a look at those proactive practices, really repairing and restoring that relationship and kind of some of those steps for that as well. One of the other examples here, so this is another nice just little flow chart, really kind of showing those classroom behavioral processes versus the office referral process. And again, an important piece, as we just talked about with that professional development, making sure that faculty staff are really on the same page as far as those categories and as far as that process and what that looks like. Couple other examples we wanted to share with you as well. This comes from Boys Town, really that continuum of correction and part of the Boys Town well-managed classrooms, just kind of taking a look at their process. It's just a nice visual reminder for that continuum. So for teachers to really be able to work through some of those pieces before that referral and just kind of what that looks like. We have had a lot of schools kind of go through creating an intervention bank, and we wanted to share this one. This actually comes from Walt Hill. But it's just a great strategy for schools just to kind of come up with some different interventions that classroom teachers could try within the classroom. Just kind of a brainstorm with all staff, really thinking about what are some of those strategies, what are some of those interventions that really kind of take little to no effort that we could try. Then in that second column, really brainstorming some things that they take a little bit more effort. Things like maybe it's a brain break, incorporating that. Maybe it's some type of movement activity. Maybe it's like a private Post-it note that's placed on the desk, things like that. And then in that third bank, really brainstorming some things that take a little bit more effort. So some things that really kind of have to think through in order to implement. So things like reflective or restorative questions. Maybe it's a change in schedule. Maybe it's a loss of a privilege, things like that. And so this is just a nice strategy for schools to be able to turn to, a nice visual that teachers could have printed out, something to reference when they're needing kind of that support or some ideas of that implementation. We also want to ensure that we're documenting consistently and that we have a process for our educators. So again, these are just a couple examples of a way for staff to really document that process. So this is an example of an office referral form. On the other side, the behavior incident report actually comes from just like an early childhood example, but just great visuals as we're thinking about needing to have a way to really collect that data. And then taking that data to really help us work through that problem-solving process in order to make decisions and what that looks like. Which really brings us to that next visual of our Nebraska NeMTSS problem-solving process and really thinking about that database decision-making. So we have a few resources, additional things to just kind of go to, because I know we're running out of time here. We just have a minute or so since we started a little bit late. But we do have from our regional leads, it's a great evidence-based practice database decision-making webinar. We do have linked in there, and then in a couple slides as well. Really takes you through that problem-solving process, taking a look at root cause analysis. We also have a problem-solving model template, which has some great reflection questions, some things that teams can utilize to really work through, taking a look at their data, what their data is showing, and then what we may need to work to implement in order to help support staff with some of those behaviors. And so just a few resources there. We also, as our SEBL specialist group, we have a few other just resources. If this is an area that you're needing support in, you would like further information in, certainly reach out to us. We have like an SEBL data to problem solve training that we've done in the past. If that's something that you would like to work through, just kind of that root cause analysis process. The last thing I want to mention on that database decision-making slide is that link at the bottom, which has a great just a few questions to be able to work through as well. So I would encourage you guys to take a look at that. It's a lengthy document, but a great one. And then that just brings us to a few reminders as we close out our time together. So our next Coffee Connect is November 29th. That is planning on continuous improvement. We also have our SEBL just suggested training roadmap and some other events coming up in November and December. That is all linked in there. And then these were the tip webinars that I had mentioned. It's that part 4, the database decision making, that really does a nice job kind of working through that problem solving process. As always, we have our exit ticket for you guys. If you are needing a certificate of attendance, you can certainly fill that out to request one of those, and we will get that to you. Otherwise, we hope to see you on November 29th for our continuous improvement one. And then finally, to close us out, our optimistic closure, and just can kind of be a personal reflection here, just really thinking about like one resource, one takeaway from what we shared today and kind of what that might look like for you moving forward. So it'll just kind of be a personal reflection as I know we're a couple minutes over. So thank you so much for joining us today. We have our contact information if you guys have any questions or need anything.